Hey everyone, it's Reed. I have some very exciting news. The social media platform that I've been a part of, that I've helped found, Sez.us, SEZ.us, had its official launch last week. I want you to go to Sez.us and get involved. This is the social media platform for sane people. You get to decide who you see and what you read. Go to Sez.us, SEZ.us, and sign up today. And now, on with the show. Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by Stephanie Ruhle, host of MSNBC's The 11th Hour with Stephanie Ruhle and an NBC senior business analyst. Prior to MSNBC, she was a news anchor for Bloomberg Television and editor-at-large for Bloomberg News and spent 14 years in finance. Today, she's coming to us from New York City. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So look, you have seen a lot in finance. You have seen a lot in media. You have seen a lot in politics. All of these things seem to be coming together now. How are we doing? Are we in a correction? Are we in a recession? Where are we?
Well, first, I would say people shouldn't get super panicked about the idea of a correction, right? It means we're 10% off the highs. We are still higher than we were last year. But let's move beyond that. This is an absolute chaotic, self-inflicted mess. And normally we give a president too much credit and too much blame for the performance of a stock market. But in this case, all blame falls squarely on Donald Trump. And it's stunning because in his first term, he was so laser beam focused on market performance. There is nothing he liked more than walking in the dining room at Mar-a-Lago and saying, has everybody looked at the stock market? And people loved it. And the thing is, that has been voters' even security blanket about Donald Trump. Like, listen, he's a business guy. It was just a few months ago. I remember people saying to me, Kamala knows nothing about business. She knows nothing about the economy. Love Trump or hate Trump, he's a business guy. I think we're reminded right now he's a business guy who many, many times failed. Now, what we're seeing is Donald Trump sticking to his knitting. If you look at Donald Trump in the 1980s and the 1990s, he always talked about how the U.S. was getting ripped off by other countries. And he's not wrong in the fact that globalization has hurt American workers. It has hurt American manufacturing. Nobody would disagree with that. And the hollowing out of America is a devastating part of the American story. And for many, it's killed the American dream. It was many people who were stuck in that space that became Donald Trump's base. He spoke for them. And so while you and I could have talked for the last few years, like Joe Biden needs to do a better job selling his winning economy, it's a winning economy. It was a winning economy for a lot of us, but the economy continues to be a failure for many people in this country who live in places where there's not big industry. And much of that is because 50 plus years ago, we were a manufacturing based economy and we're not anymore. And so the spirit of what Donald Trump is doing speaks to his base. But the problem is the back end of that trade of, we are inflicting short-term pain because we are bringing back manufacturing to the American people. The problem with that statement is the bringing back manufacturing is a false promise. Now, you could say to me, well, wait a minute. Didn't Apple just say they're going to do this? And aren't people building data centers here? Yes, they are. Most of those things were going to happen with or without Donald Trump. And the fact that he's now looking to impose tariffs, not just on China, who is our adversary, who has been ripping us off, but our closest allies, Europe, Canada, Mexico, makes no sense. Because if we really wanted to take on China, we would do it as a group, not in this individual manner that Trump is taking on.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I was texting with a friend of mine who is part of the cohort, Stephanie, that I call the FU white guy. These are the guys who are very wealthy. They live in nice places. They have big houses. Their wives probably don't have to work. Their kids are either in good schools or in college. And he was sort of like this, we're doing this, we're getting out of this, we're getting out of that. And I was like, but a multipolar world is a far more dangerous and unstable and unsteady and uncertain world. But I can't convince him otherwise. To your point, as far as he's concerned, not necessarily about we're getting ripped off, but all of the other things that Trump is scratching that anger on really appeal to him, whether or not it's good for anybody else, whether or not it's good for our kids, whether or not it's good for the economy. He's just the anger and the destruction enough seems to be enough for a lot of people.
Reed, that guy is part of the same cohort of people who think all federal workers are lazy losers who do nothing. And you know why they think that? Because they have no idea what those people do for a living. Right, right. Donald Trump has painted the federal workforce as this lazy group of people who do nothing. Now, is it true that the government should be run better? Is there waste? Is there fat? Absolutely. And when you talk to big business people, they love this idea that, like, let's bring some business people in to clean things up. And on some level, I appreciate it because Washington bureaucracy is so overregulated that you often can't fire people that you want to. You can't get rid of contracts that you should. That's frustrating. However, what's happening is so irresponsible and it's so short-sighted. And that person you're talking to, I'm sure, has a deep understanding of how, let's say, corporate restructurings work, right? So let's pretend like what we're doing is having a corporate restructuring. If there was a restructuring, you would spend months and months interviewing, analyzing every department, every agency, every team, every job function. And I'm not here doing a McKinsey consulting ad, but you would have the likes of a McKinsey type coming in and saying, let's evaluate each one of these groups and see where we need to make changes. That's not happening. They are walking in with a figurative and in some cases literal chainsaw and saying, let's get rid of 1 in every 4 employees at NOAA. And so it's easy for people who have never been at risk, who have never been financially at risk, socially at risk, physically at risk, to say, let's do away with this stuff because they do not know what it's like. And government is not supposed to operate like business.
Right.
They're just two different things. Well, the ultimate goal is let's break everything down and privatize it. When you privatize a business, it doesn't have to serve every consumer. It just has to serve the consumers that make those businesses money. So
Right.
when you privatize education, when you privatize the postal service, my question is, how are you getting to the people who need it most? In business, they don't.
I would also say in a past life, I spent a lot of time in, public affairs and PR and all that. And, corporate America, as you know, not exactly what I would call the model of efficiency in many ways either, right? There's plenty
Correct.
of bureaucracy. I mean, I remember working for a big telecom company years ago, and, in the communications area, Stephanie, you know this. The people there were not really worried about, like, the company was going to go on one way or the other. It was like they had this narrow slice of the world that belonged to only them. And all they did was ensure that no one no one got anywhere near their little slice of the world. The rest of the company be damned, so long as they could justify their reason for being. That was all that mattered.
100%. And they weren't going to spend one single budgetary dollar on a safety net. And in the government, we need a safety net on top of a safety net because that telecom company, at the end of the day, it could go under. The world won't change. But what about if our government does? I mean, Reed, the fact that the idea was even floated this week that perhaps the Social Security Department would no longer have a phone service that you could call with a question or a field office to go to, can you just think for a moment about how cruel that is? And I'm not saying it from a sensitivity standpoint, but who receives Social Security, right? Many, many people who are homebound and can't get out of the house. Many people who do not have access to the internet, who don't know how to use technology. They might be the last group left that doesn't want to get their statement online. And the fact that they could even entertain the idea of getting rid of having that phone capability would have saved a tiny bit of money and potentially inflicted a huge amount of pain and panic. And where you have one shred of confidence that, like, okay, maybe politics works. An article came out floating this in the Washington Post. I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday morning. And by the afternoon, there was so much pushback, the idea was scrapped.
Right. Well, and Musk went on Fox News and basically said, this is the main driver of cost, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Listen, I'm not going to defend Elon Musk. In Republicans' defense and in your former line of universe, Social Security is broken. Okay.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not a Ponzi scheme. It's not a Ponzi scheme. but it is broken. It's not like you and I pay into Social Security. It's getting invested. It's growing. And then when it comes our turn, we're going to click. No, we are paying into a system and our money is going to someone else. And when it comes to be our turn, there will not be enough left.
Right.
We need to fix it. And there's almost no political will to do so, because if you address it, you're going to lose voters. And I actually think one of the reasons Elon Musk obsesses over it is because lots of those tech guys have that deep libertarian survival of the fittest mentality, one. But two, I think he likes it because it will really show the world how big his cojones are. Because Paul Ryan wanted to, you know what I mean? There's a laundry list of Republicans that came before him that planned to take on entitlement reform. But when the rubber hit the road, none of them could do it. And he'd love to be the guy to say, like, well, I did it, because he doesn't need to get reelected. But none of those Republicans can go to their home districts and make this work if they really slash Social Security.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second
Do
to your
it.
point about Social Security, which is, you're right. It does need to be fixed. In fact, I remember having a conversation with someone who really cared about this issue a few years ago, and being like, look, you can make an argument. You gotta raise the cap on, it's what it stops at $100,000. Okay. You know, do you have to raise the age? Maybe, but you don't have to raise the age on people now. You can phase these things in. You can means test it. So there are ways to fix it. But my question is, Stephanie, is like, was there ever going to be a political will outside of the chaos we're seeing? Like, was this the radical change, the radical operation, the radical surgery that needed to happen? Because that's the other thing I hear from a lot of my friends in that same cohort I was talking about earlier, is like, at least he does something, right? To your point, like, there's always the government needs to be fixed, but no one else was going to fix it because there wasn't the political will. I'm not saying it's the right way to do it. I'm just saying, like, do you think there ever would have been another way to do it?
I would say yes and no. Like, I do have some level of appreciation for, you had to come in. Um, Here's how I would compare it. When you look at a company like Uber, Uber was able to build and grow because the original founder, Travis Kalanick, truly had this outlaw mentality of, I'm going to get pushed out of every city because the taxi and limousine commission is so strong. They have so much control over the mayor in this town. I'm never going to get in. So you do have businesses that you could look at that say, I had to have this outlaw attitude to even get into the system. So you had to have some level of outlaw to say, you know what? I realize I'm breaking the system, but I need to do that to make change. I can actually appreciate that, because we have seen historically, reports get written, proposals get proposed, and then they never go anywhere because it's like, no, the DC bureaucratic machine chews you up and spits you out.
Right.
So I do hold some space for the idea of government doesn't work. It doesn't work for the majority of the American people. We have to do something about it. However, the fact that it's Elon Musk and the way that he's doing it and the people he's doing it with, and don't take issue with the fact that they're young. What does that matter? I take issue with the fact that none of them have any expertise in the agencies that they're cutting.
Well, I mean, how could they, right? I mean, most of them are, young enough to be our kids.
But imagine if the president, who had a huge amount of buy-in from the business community, actually said, I'm putting together a coalition. I want these people from this industry. I want these people. I want these experts, these experts. Please come together for the good of our country. Look at this agency. Tell us where we need to cut. I actually think he would have been able to pull together those people and they would have made a difference. Even if that's not what I personally want, if that's what you want, he could have done it. But that's not what he's doing.
Let's talk about the CEOs for a second for a couple of things. One is, so what is the mood of the CEO class? I get the sense that, I heard Mark Benioff say we finally have a pro-business administration, as if like we've had so many anti-business administrations in the last 50 years.
Okay, I'll say this, and I know Mark really well. I'm a huge fan of Mark. I think Mark is part of the mindset, and he's not alone, that despite the fact that the economy grew extraordinarily well under President Biden, Mark's stock did very well. President Biden didn't speak to the business community. I remember right after Davos 2 years ago, someone in Mark's ilk said to me after Davos, a person's priorities based on their schedule. And President Biden doesn't spend any time with the CEO community. And whether he needs to kiss the ring or not, they like to be spoken to. They like to be part of the conversation. And one could argue that his rhetoric, or they felt like his rhetoric, was against them. They certainly did not like the FTC chair, Lena Khan, who they felt like was extremely academic, but not practical. And when Trump won, even though the majority of Fortune 500 CEOs were not outwardly backing the current president, because they like continuity, they like regularity, they were excited about the fact that he is pro-business and that he's like, let's tear up every regulation and let's impose tax cuts. They love that. However, in the last 5 weeks, he has done the most extraordinary thing. He has managed to strangle out almost all animal spirits, except for businesses that are directly benefiting, like crypto, or those CEOs who are paying the $5 million for a one-on-one meeting with him down at Mar-a-Lago and then getting an exemption that suits their business. But the overall business community, the problem is they're just tangled. How do you plan your business? How do you plan your investing? How do you plan your spending if you have no idea which direction we're going in? Never before have we had an intraday chart of where we stand on tariffs. We're on the tariffs, we're off the tariffs, we're on the tariffs. Like, I can't imagine that the president is going to do a 180 on tariffs. He's loved them. He's always loved them. He's loved them since the 80s. But the business community now is obviously feeling strangled. And one way that you, I think, should look at the market, because the White House will tell you the market is just a snapshot in time. It is a snapshot in time, but it's not a snapshot of today. It's a snapshot of what investors think the future holds, right? They don't buy stocks based on what somebody's earnings were right now. They buy stocks based on what they think the company's going to do in the future. And given that you are seeing this widespread selling, people do not know where we're headed. If the president had led with tax cuts, not these aggressive tariffs, I think we'd be in a different picture.
So it's not just the CEO class, though, and it's not just big businesses that need that continuity. It's also, medium and small size businesses as well.
And it's consumers. We're seeing consumer optimism go down. Like, if you're a small business, you still have all sorts of inputs into your business, and now things are getting way more expensive.
Right. And again, you're going to have to cover that. I was listening to a show the other night about a guy who's like, yeah, if I bought this thing from China, and it got, between February 1st and March 7th, there was an exemption for this one time. But but then the boats got delayed or whatever, and it showed up on March 10th, and now they're not exempt, and now I got to pay for that. But, I had to order this stuff in December before all this. And you just forget, too, that, as you know, being a small business owner, in some ways, far more than being a big CEO, is spinning a lot of plates.
Oh my gosh. And you have no leverage over your suppliers. Zero.
And when someone is pelting you with snowballs while you're trying to spin the plates, like, that makes life a lot more difficult.
It most certainly does. And Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, said something at the New York Economic Club last week where he said, buying cheap goods is not the American dream. It's not what we're about. You're right. It's not the American dream. But the thing is, Reed, it is the American way. And over the last 50 years, we have become addicted, accustomed to buying the cheapest goods possible. And now the way our supply chain works, even things that we manufacture here, lots of the inputs come from other countries. And this globalization has in many ways been great for the American consumer and some businesses that we've driven down costs, and it's been good for the shareholder, but it's been devastating for American manufacturing. But just simply inputting tariffs without a long-term strategic plan, I just don't think there's a clean and clear and positive solve for it. I hope I'm wrong.
I want to stay on that for a second, because I heard that, and what I thought immediately, Stephanie, was, to your point, was, no, that was the trade that we were offered, which was, we're going to take all this stuff, TVs, cars, whatever it is, right? Move it someplace else where they get paid pennies or dimes on the dollar, right? And you're going to get your $10 DVD player at Christmas time.
And we all said, yay!
Yay! Because now, again, everybody has a flat screen television. Everybody has an iPhone. But like, where those things hang, right? Whether or not it's in, a rough neighborhood in Grand Rapids, Michigan, or, on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, right? Like, once you step outside your door, right? Things look a lot different. Once you look at your bank statement, things look a lot different. So just because you're both looking at the same cheap television does not mean that when you're reflected, the world is the same at all. And I would also say this, I just want to go to this, is we got high on it. It made everybody in a weird way feel equal. The problem is that once you've reached equilibrium, right? People remember, oh, wait a second, like my factory shut down 30 years ago. I've been doing odd jobs. I've been doing this. Now we're looking into a future where things are even more uncertain. Not only, yes, okay, they're going to reshore some manufacturing, but you talked about like data centers. How many actual human beings does a data center need? I mean, it needs a bunch to build it, right? Okay, great. But once it's running, right, how many bodies does it need? But also, where the hell are you going to get the power for it? And so now this is all of these things that we're talking about. But the people we're still missing are the people who were most left out of everything for the last 30, 40, 50 years.
And they live in places where there aren't other jobs, okay? And this takes you to all the federal job cuts, okay? So Elon Musk has taken the chainsaw to federal employees. Only 5% are in the DC area. And if you go to some of those rural, far-reaching parts of the country, there's not big business. There's not even that much small business because the economies aren't strong enough to support small business. But what there are government jobs. So I keep thinking about it when they're talking about massive layoffs at the Postal Service. Think about all the good, hardworking Americans that work at the imperfect Postal Service or the DMV, okay? When those jobs get wiped out, where do you think those people are going to work? When you look at states like, I don't know, Alabama, where the largest employer in the state is the University of Alabama. If we suddenly pull all funding from public universities and hospital systems, where are those? You're going to see massive job cuts. We just saw in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins is slashing jobs because of NIH cuts. You think Baltimore has a booming economy? You think there's tons of big businesses, right? I saw somebody on TV from the Heritage Foundation who said, we got a labor shortage in this country, right? People are worried about layoffs. There's other jobs to be had. I'm sorry. If you're losing a job where you're a weather analyst with NOAA, your next job isn't going to be you're a home health care worker at a nursing home.
Right.
There's just this huge, unfortunate mismatch. And I'm deeply concerned when you talk about the tariffs on one hand, but these federal job cuts and the knock-on effect of all these cuts, what they're going to do to regional economies around the country.
Well, the thing is, I wrote about this last year because it was part of the Project 2025 stuff where they specifically, singled out
Project
NOAA.
2025, that was not going to have anything to do
No.
with this administration.
No.
Don't you remember the campaign? That was
Oh, yeah.
hogwash.
I know. I thought about NOAA, right? They're the weather people. And where do most of the catastrophic weather events take place? Tornado Alley, which is the Midwest, from Texas basically to Minnesota, and the Gulf Coast, right? Where do these things take place? And so now you'll never convince me that they don't want to get rid of NOAA because he's still pissed off about Sharpiegate, right? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But the point is that those are the people who are going to get most hurt. Also, those are the same people, if we want to get into another sector, who also can't get insurance on their homes, right? Because they live not necessarily in a tornado zone, but in a hurricane zone or out in California, those fire zones. I mean, we had to get new insurance last summer. We live in the mountains of Utah, and they said, oh, no, you're a fire danger now. And so that's the other part is all of this stuff, the trickle down economics is not trickling down like we thought. It's not that there's going to be all these wealthy people who'll sort of sprinkle wealth into the greater populace. The trickle down effect is that everybody downstream from the top 1%, 5% or whatever is going to figure out, like, literally, Stephanie, how do I get through the day? If I can't insure my house and a hurricane hits it, what do I do? It's not the people in the Palisades. Don't get me wrong. Like, if you lose a home, I can only imagine the traumatic effects of it. But if you live in Altadena, right, and your cost basis 25, 30 years ago was $350,000, and now your replacement cost is $700,000, and you got the last resort in California, you've got insurers who don't want to come there, you're going to have a lumber shortage and everything else now because of tariffs, you're going to have an employment shortage because anybody who might have done that work is probably staying home because they're scared to death. Like, this is where the rubber meets the road. But how do you communicate that to Americans who are like, everybody's lying to me, everything sucks, it has sucked, that it sucks now doesn't surprise me?
I really appreciate that you are bringing this up because I think it's those Americans who justifiably don't trust the system. It's those Americans who are like, wait a minute. I live in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. And when I grew up, I'm speaking metaphorically. And folks in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, who used to work in steel mills, their goal every year was to figure out a way to get Steelers tickets because they wanted to go to Steelers games. That is so far out of reach and has been for years and years. It's why they're no longer doing what their union leader is telling them to do come election time, because they're like, this system doesn't work for me. I don't trust anyone. And I saw this firsthand in a sad way this past week because I was in Northwest North Carolina. My son is volunteering for the week doing hurricane relief work in just outside Asheville.
Mm-hmm.
And what I saw all over the place, and it made me so sad, was spray painted on the side of walls, "River Lives Matter." So here are these folks who live in river towns and small mountain communities who were already living somewhat off the grid. And then they get a hurricane like Helene, which is wind and it's rain and it's mudslides, which even if you had insurance, you're not insured for mud that's now up to the ceiling in the first floor of your house. And let me tell you, Monday night, I'm in an Uber and my Uber driver said, I was asking how things are, and he's a real sort of mountain man.
Yeah.
I said, how are things going? And he said, well, good news. Now that Donald Trump is in the job, we're going to start getting relief because all of the relief money for us has been tied up in cities and they've been holding it back because of DEI.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Reed, I wanted to jump out of the car window
and into the river.
It broke my heart and into the river. And it broke my heart because, like, here's this really hard worker. This guy was a 75-year-old guy giving me an Uber ride from the airport at 3 a.m. And he has been forgotten. And the red tape has strangled him. And he's still living in his brother's trailer because he doesn't have anywhere to live. And he has been told by right-wing media that DEI mayors in cities are keeping their relief money from them. And that to me is just tragically sad. And I know I'm naive, but God, shouldn't we be above politics and actually be able to say, yes, we had a great economic recovery in large portions of the country, but there remain some portions of the country where people are truly struggling with no way out. Let's solve for this. And I think President Biden wanted to address that with the infrastructure law. He wanted to do that with the CHIPS Act, and that seems to be wiped from our memory. And the one thing I would say is we do have to take a close look at regulation because sometimes things are so regulated that we're not getting relief or help where it needs to get. And a great example of how it worked was Pennsylvania. Look what Josh Shapiro did when there was that collapse on I-95, or look what Wes Moore did when the Key Bridge had that collapse. They had those things fixed. I think I-95 was in 3 months. Same thing with the Key Bridge. You know why? Because they said, I get it. We do have to worry about the piping plover that lives under the bridge, and we have to make sure we do have to care about it surviving. But we also have to break some eggs and just fix things and move forward for people. And there shouldn't be anyone in this country who had a hurricane hit them 6 months ago that says, I haven't seen one single person from the government here trying to help us. That's a problem.
Well, it is. I mean, there's a couple of things there. One is the irony, the sad irony is that the 75-year-old Uber driver who feels that way, so hopeless, who's, upset about the people in the city, there's probably his mirror image in a city somewhere, in an urban
Great
core
point.
somewhere, who feels the exact same way. And here's the thing. They didn't vote for Donald Trump. They didn't vote for anybody. They stayed home.
Yes. That's 100% correct. And we as a country, or our leaders, need to think about the 92 million people who didn't walk out of their house to vote because they think their vote doesn't count. And I understand why they feel that way.
Exactly. Why would they believe otherwise? I mean, that's what I saw, going all over the place, right? I've used this story before. The listeners have heard it. You go to Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin, and, sort of north central Wisconsin. The paper mill, which is probably 2 miles long and 800 feet high, right, went out of business, took 2,000 jobs with it, 2,500 jobs with it in a town of 20,000. I mean, boom, gone.
And when that's gone, so's the diner, so's the hair salon, so's the bowling alley, so's the dress shop. Boom.
Right, because it affects just about everybody in town, or somebody knows everybody in town. But the flip side of that was this was also a town where, the people were taking care of each other because no one else was doing it. Right. So they're like, okay, well, if the cavalry's not coming, Stephanie, then we'll just do it ourselves. But that also creates that distance and disconnection. Like, don't come here with your promises. Don't come here with your big talk. Don't knock on my door 5 weeks before an election telling me that the world's going to come to an end if I don't participate. I don't buy it. Right. Because going back to what you talked about, like the American dream, it's easy for you and me to sit here and we're having this conversation
Because we live it.
because we lived it. Right. I was lucky enough to live it. But the American way of life, I think that's what you called it, I think is far more, germane to the conversation, which is it's all well and good if the suburbs and the exurbs are doing really well, but the rest of the country isn't. And here's the thing, they have made their voices heard, right? Repeatedly, twice, right? In 2016 and 2024. Now, COVID, right, was a whole other thing. But to your point about the right-wing media, I was asking a friend of mine this. If Fox News and all the podcasts and everything else, if that's worth 1 or 2 points in a close election every year, really difficult for Democrats to get back on board. Because not only do they not have those channels, they don't even know how to talk to these people most of the time, right? Because I told somebody this the other day, like, to me, the strike point in 2024 was, okay, yes, economics, but it really was the haves and the have-nots, or the elites and the non-elites. And the elites were like, hey, I'm elite and you're not.
The funny thing about that is the whole elite argument has to be turned on its head, because we now have the wealthiest administration in human history with the richest man in the world with almost unilateral control over the federal government. And it's amazing because I've interacted with a number of these mega successful guys who were sort of Silicon Valley Democrats or maybe libertarians, who are now super bought in to Doge, or they're participating in Doge. And they really have this chip on their shoulder, like, finally, we're in control. This is payback for all of our pain and suffering. And I'm like, what pain and suffering? We live in a country that made these young men richer beyond their wildest dreams. Like, the wealth in the tech industry has so far surpassed anything we have ever seen in traditional corporate America or Wall Street. Yet they're the ones with their sleeves rolled up and their arms folded in DC. And they're like, I am so sick and tired of your wokeness and your DEI. I'm coming for you.
Right. As they recolonize Hawaiian Islands.
Yeah. They absolutely did. And I find it so rich and absurd in that, on one hand, I actually do see and I hear, and I'm not saying I agree with it, but I do hear from many people in corporate America a DEI exhaustion. Again, I'm not endorsing this feeling, but I definitely talk to people who feel like it became such a huge focus that it became a focus over business, and they want to break from it. I'm not endorsing it, but I do hear it. But for these guys to act like, finally, we're getting things back. I'm like, back from what?
Right.
You've been winning since the get.
Yeah, right. You were always winning. But again, I think that goes back to my buddy at the beginning of our conversation, right? Which is, I don't know if it's like, they don't have religion, so they're looking for something else, right? They don't have God, so they want to go to Mars. There's that guy who wants to live forever. You've got Andreessen writing these ridiculous things.
But remember that Mars. Never forget, that's what Elon Musk really wants to do. So I find Doge to be this silly front in that, like, we're cutting costs right before they extend tax cuts that are going to balloon our debt. And what Elon Musk really wants us to do, Trump mentioned it at his address last week. You keep hearing it in small places. He wants to go to Mars on the government's dime. And what that will cost will trump any U.S. aid program you have ever thought of in the history of ever.
Well, I mean, I would venture to say there's a number of people who would be happy to send him there if that's what it took.
Yeah, well, guess what? If he leaves scorched earth, right? If Doge just takes a hatchet to our government, he's going to ride off into the sunset, get on his rocket with his 14 children, and leave rubble and dirt and dust here for the rest of us to have to pick up the pieces. And I think that reality is something that some Republican lawmakers are starting to realize and potentially reckon with.
Yes. I mean, I was talking to, there's a friend of mine out here where I live who had come out with his brother for a vacation. And we were talking about this. And I mean, you talk about stuff in sort of the corporate aspect of things. The way that they're operating, right, in these first weeks, if they stopped today, it would take years to figure out where to go, right? And
Years.
to figure out how to fix all this stuff.
Reed, they don't even know. Think about all these people who got laid off and now judges are saying, let's reinstate them. How? To what office? Like what exact job? And like all the people who they fired, the work they were doing, where did that work go over the last 3 weeks? Like it is a colossal mess.
Well, but this is also one thing, and let me just say this, and let me try and be as charitable as I can. I
Do it.
really don't need more people posting to social media, Judge halts X, right? Judge halts Y. Until and unless somebody's badge gets turned back on, right? And they are able to log into their computer again, like it's all bullshit.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
It's just resistance porn. It doesn't exist.
Yes.
Like you could say, oh, okay,
yes.
yeah, the judge, like, as I have said before, the enforcement mechanism is the Marshal Service. Who do they work for? Right?
That is the best point you've made in the history of ever. The
Right?
whole, like, people are getting their jobs back. When, where, how is that working? And there's no plan for it.
No. All right. So this is how I want to finish our conversation.
Oh, let's do this.
Chuck Schumer.
You're wrong.
I am right. But
make your
no,
argument.
No. You are the guest, so you get to lead off.
So listen, I absolutely understand that Democrats have very, very, very few tools at their disposal to actually resist more than just speaking and doing a social media post. And I completely appreciate and understand why people are frustrated and angry that the Republicans put together the worst possible continuing resolution that does nothing to help the American people, that only gives Donald Trump more power and ability to spend and do whatever he wants. I get that, and I completely understand why one would feel like Democrats should not sign on to this. However, I think Donald Trump and Elon Musk would have loved it if Chuck Schumer and Democrats shut down the government. Because if the government shut down, we would take the tumbling stock market and send it into a crash. And now that hellscape that is the current market, now it's completely owned by Donald Trump. Had Chuck Schumer and Democrats shut down the government, Donald Trump would then shift the narrative and shift the story so Democrats would own the market crash. It would be Democrats crash the market, right? Shutting down the government is hugely expensive, and they would move that narrative. Now, every single thing that is happening, good, bad, or otherwise, and there's not a long list of good, Donald Trump has to own. So Democrats can simply say they have control of everything. You get what you get and you don't get upset. That's why I think it was a no-win, but I think it was, I understand the move. You disagree.
I do disagree, and I'll tell you why. Because
Please.
One is everything is so chaotic anyway. Two, I feel like there's a part of this where we are, as a nation and as a historical era, overtaken by events. The roller coaster has started down the tracks. Whatever Schumer was going to do, right, was frankly not going to matter in the short or long term. Maybe, okay, you could take the market. I'm not sure about that. You're more of the expert on that than I am. But I will say this, is that I think that the political damage that he did to his own conference or to his own caucus and to his own party, right, I think is worse than if they had tried to stand up for even a little bit. Because here's what happens is they look feckless. So remember all those people who stayed home last year? Why are they going to turn out now? Now, let me speak to the other side of your argument, which is Trump owns everything. Right, he does. He owned COVID, and he lost by like 57,000 votes. Right. And so what I'm saying is on the political aspect on this and downstream to the electoral aspect of this is that we should not expect that anything is going to go the way we thought it was going to go just because it always has. And I would venture to say, because Trump and the Republicans are very good at this, and I used to be part of it, and Democrats are really bad at it, which is if it's not the economy, it'll be something else they keep them pinned down on. And so I just think that Schumer had an opportunity to show a little spine for his caucus and for his party and chose not to. Again, to your point about to me, a status quo that no longer exists.
Listen, I hear you. I appreciate everything you're saying. You could be right. You know politics better than I do. I just, for people who argue the government does nothing and the government doesn't work, it's performative, shutting down the government would have only amplified that argument.
Right. And I would venture to say he's not a great leader to begin with. Not in this time. Maybe in another time.
But very sexy. But he's very sexy.
Oh, God. Ugh. All right. Thank you. Now, I was going to eat breakfast, but now I'm not going to. All right. Stephanie, tell us, you're on 11th Hour every night. You travel the country. You travel the world. Give us an interesting anecdote. You gave us the Uber in Asheville, North Carolina. Give us one more from the road before we let you go.
You know, I also just came back from Selma, Alabama. That's where I was this weekend also. And I will tell you this. I took my sons. It was the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. And the thing that overwhelmed me the most was I realized people are exhausted. People are overwhelmed. When you say democracy's at risk, their eyes glaze over and they're like, yeah. What happened on Bloody Sunday, right, were a group of people in plain clothes, in church clothes, who were just standing up and peacefully, lawfully marching, not to try to get a right that they didn't already have, not to try to fight for more. All these people wanted was to exercise their legal right to vote, that vote that was being suppressed. And I just keep thinking about their bravery. Those men and women, again, in their church clothes and street clothes, marched across a bridge, knowing that on the other side of the bridge, they were facing tear gas and dogs and violent law enforcement who was coming for them. And still, they marched ahead because 60 years ago, they deeply understood and they fought for the preservation of democracy. And it's just so important to think about that right now.
Listen, I mean, God bless John Lewis. You know, where's the next John Lewis? That's what I keep asking myself.
And guess what? We don't need people to be John Lewis, but we need people to be engaged and we need them to care. How many people, I'll ask you, and then in your life have said, I'm so exhausted by all this. I'm so exhausted by the media, the news, the hysteria. I'm tuned out, right? You live in a beautiful part of the country where people are like, I don't want to pay attention to any of this. I want to go outdoors. I want to go for a hike. I want to go skiing.
Right.
Democracy is fragile. And I'm not asking people to activate. I'm not even telling people how to vote. I'm just asking people to be informed and engaged, because couple that with the misinformation canon that's out there. Every person, I think, has the opportunity to be an informed American and stop misinformation. If we're all operating with an equal set of facts, then vote how you want, live how you want. But the misinformation is so hugely dangerous, and all of us can participate in improving that. And that's what I hope for people. I'm not asking people to be John Lewis. I'm asking them to be informed.
Well, as Anne Applebaum wrote in one of her books, the demise of democracy is when a society can no longer have a common argument. And I think that's really what you're talking to. Stephanie Ruhle, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
And everybody else, we'll see you next time.